I keep thinking you'll come on back to me. You'll come on back to me.
Today's content is complex and interconnected, and tomorrow's isn't going to get any simpler. It needs to be ready for devices we haven't even dreamed of yet. Our next speaker has spent the last decade helping people develop clear communication and human-centered digital experiences. Please welcome Rebekah Cancino.
You'll come on back to me. I keep thinking you'll come on back to me.
Howdy. How are you?
I keep
Learned a lot today. Did you all grab a cookie? Yeah, okay, good. Well, earlier, if you were here for Jonathan's opening keynote, you would have heard him talk about how we have these big, wicked, complex problems to solve and how it's going to take all of us if we're going to get our way through that. And that's what I'm here to talk about today is how are we going to do that work together? But before I go into that, I want to take you back to November of 1995. It was the launch of the world's first fully computer-animated film, Toy Story, and it was spectacular. It won a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's swept up over $200 million in revenue. And not only was it this huge achievement of both technology and creativity, right, and design, it was the result of this huge 10-year pursuit of a dream by a man named Ed Catmull, but he didn't do it alone. He had a lot of people by his side, and he talks about how every film at Pixar, whether it's Toy Story or anything else, isn't the product of a few people, a few creative geniuses, but rather it's built on tens of thousands of ideas of everyone across a 200 to 250 person team. That's what it takes to pull off a Pixar film. Can you imagine? And they found in working on these projects that their workflow and their editorial process didn't look like traditional film editorial process did, which was nice and neat and linear. It made it really easy for one person to kind of do their part, hand it off to the next department. It actually looked a lot more like this: iterative, overlapping, messy. And Ed Catmull said later, sort of in retrospect, talking about his achievements, that he felt the most exciting thing that he did was really to create the unique environment that allowed that kind of work to happen in the first place. And that his ongoing mission would be to preserve the confluence of forces necessary to create magic. And when I think about where Pixar was and how drastically different workflow was for a computer animated film versus a traditionally animated film, it reminds me of where we are today in the digital and web experiences that we build. Because if you think about it, we expect so much of our lives to be online now. And the more of our lives that we move online, the more things that we manage online, the more content is online. And I'm not just talking about words on a page. Jared Spool likes to say everything is content. Content is what the user needs or wants right now. And if you think of it that way, it means that content is at the heart of everything that we design, and it really can't be owned by one department or one person. So when you look at, workflows like this, where maybe one person owns the strategy and then someone else gets to make all the design decisions, then it goes over to production, it starts to feel like a gross oversimplification, doesn't it? Because in reality, all of those different decisions along the way are overlapping and owned by people all across your organization. Even if you're in a really small team, there's probably a lot of different hands that are part of creating that overall user experience. And yet here we are in 2016, still pretending that we can own a single part of it. And in the face of responsive, adaptive, sensor-rich digital design, those workflows are starting to break down and cause noticeable friction, right, when it comes to managing and maintaining the web properties and the digital experiences that we're responsible for. Clearly, content, design, and code are so intertwined, their experience together, making them should be that way too. But that's hard, and it takes a certain kind of collaboration. I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot of people almost shy away from collaboration as something that they want to adopt because it can waste time and it can feel messy, and it can result in things that don't really solve problems. That's not the kind of collaboration that we're talking about today. We're talking about the kinds of collaboration that allows an organization to create something much greater and stronger than any one person could have done on their own. This kind of collaboration has real benefits. It has benefits like helping us deliver better outcomes, helping us launch changes faster, helping us decrease cost, and then boosting morale of our teams, which of course leads to increased productivity. So when it comes to accessing that kind of collaboration, it's much less about learning about other people's processes and trying to mimic or mirror that. It's not about finding the next piece of software or shiny tool that's going to help us collaborate more efficiently. And it's much more about creating an environment for our own process to emerge. Much like Ed Catmull recognized at Pixar, it wasn't so much about creating the next film, but about preserving what they had that made that kind of collaboration possible in the first place. So the question I'm asking today that we're going to explore is, how can we set the stage for our own magic? This is a question that I have been borderline obsessed with for the past probably 5 years. And in light of this, I started experimenting and trying different techniques with my team, seeing what I could learn, iterate, and change and get improved results from, and seeing if I could actually get to collaboration that provided some of those benefits we talked about. And anytime I saw a digital experience that seemed really remarkable or exceptional, I would find out who was responsible behind it. I would call them up and I would ask them, how did you do it? Who was involved? Tell me about your workflow. Tell me about your process. Tell me about your company culture. And surprisingly, many of these people were so generous and were willing to share their work stories with me, and I'll get to share some of those insights with you too. But in all of this research and experimentation that I went through, I discovered that, in fact, there is a prerequisite to having that sort of next level collaboration, and that is a culture of openness. Without a culture of openness, we can only play at collaboration. We'll never really get to those breakthrough results that our organizations need. And the thing about a culture of openness is that they don't happen by accident. They don't happen automatically. It takes intention. Just like when we see architecture or buildings that feel very open in nature, that's because the architect was following a set of principles that led to open design. We can do the same thing. And I propose that a culture of openness is made up of a spectrum of sorts, right? A spectrum that goes from personal openness all the way out to exponential openness. And don't worry, if that doesn't make sense, I'll tell you what they mean as we go along. Okay, so first stop on our journey is personal openness. Personal openness. Just like Michael Jackson, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. That song, I love that song a lot. Okay, anyways, personal openness, it begins with us. I define it as an open mindset, a personal belief system that's grounded in humility, equality, and respect for our fellow collaborators. And this personal lens of openness defines how we see everything else, right? You might say, Becca, that sounds a lot like humility. And you would be right. This is true. But humility isn't just a fluffy, nice-to-have thing. Recent research has shown that humility is a critical strength for organizations and a serious, dangerous weakness for those that lack it. But what does that look like in the workplace? How does that play out? To illustrate, I'll tell you of a time that I wasn't being very personally open. I was working on a project, and I was having to look at how to display some content in a search results page on a website. And I had pretty much made up my mind, lazy loading or endless scrolling. Best way, not going to get in, not going to be intrusive for the user, going to make it really easy. Over in the SEO, our SEO director was like, pagination, because we need the search results to be crawlable and findable. What's the use of this endlessly scrolling experience if no one can find the things in the first place? And so we were kind of in a gridlock, and we decided to get together with our developer and sort of put our own notions aside and explore what a possibility of how these search results would be displayed could be. Well, we looked at some user research. Guess what? I was kind of wrong. Turns out there's quite a few people who really like paginated search results because it makes it easier to get back to a specific thing on a small device or mobile phone. And there's a lot of people who like lazy loading too. And guess what? Turns out there's a JavaScript workaround that makes it easy, right, to mark up endless scrolling and makes it easy for search results to be able to understand that information too. So we came to a joint kind of result that was both endless scrolling and pagination, and we made sure to mark up things with JavaScript so that it would be really findable for search engines. Everyone was happy. My point of telling you this story is that we wouldn't have gotten to that place if we weren't able to sort of put aside what we thought was the right answer and be open to each other's ideas. This happens all the time. It's because when we hear information as humans, there's this natural part of our brain that's looking for, is that right? Does that make sense? Does that align, right? We're judging things, even if we're not being judgmental. And so in order to kind of skip that, it's really helpful to not try and have ideas and come up with possibilities and then decide on which one is right at the same time. So it's good, and when we're working with people, to set aside a certain time where we say, we're going to suspend judgment. We're going to go for quantity and come up with as many ideas as possible. And then after that, we will go ahead and apply some critical oversight and decide what's going to be the right response. The second part of personal openness is just asking a lot of questions. Asking a lot of questions, yeah, it might be a little vulnerable and it might be risky, but it opens up endless possibilities. Early in my career, I used to think that by asking questions, I would look kind of stupid or not professional, and so I would write things down in a notebook. I remember one time I was like, what is nomenclature? Like, look that up later. And what I didn't realize is that when I was doing that, not only was I shutting down the opportunity to learn from someone and have them share their expertise, maybe get a way better definition than I could find on Google, but I was closing down the opportunity to actually move forward with the work that we were doing because I'd have to go get the answer and then come back and pick up where I left off. So, what are 3 easy ways to practice personal openness? 1, include someone you normally wouldn't in your project. So just like an SEO person that maybe you always disagree with, or perhaps there's a developer, maybe you butt heads, ask them for their opinion, but don't just ask and listen to kind of volley for your idea, right? Suspend judgment when you're asking for their input. Separate the time that you're going to be considering ideas from the time that you're critically thinking about which one is actually the right option. And then 3, stop pretending, just ask. So you can actually take on this challenge today while you're at the conference before you leave. If you heard about something you're kind of not sure of, or maybe you'd like more information on, I challenge you, talk to someone here about it. Go up to a speaker and ask afterwards. All right, moving along to the next segment, active openness. Active openness is putting personal openness to good use. It's when we channel our open mindset and to encourage curiosity and care for the whole outcome. What use is being personally open if we don't put it into action? I was talking with Nicole Fenton, the author of Nicely Said, Writing for the Web with Purpose and Style, about her collaboration techniques. And she said something that really struck me. She said, content doesn't belong to content, design doesn't belong to design, and code doesn't belong to dev. And what she's talking about is when people are interacting with our web products and services, they don't see those things separately. They're just seeing one big experience. And because of that, we're all sort of responsible for that end experience. Kind of like Ron was talking about earlier, right? Who's your UX department? Your entire company. We're all responsible for that user experience in the end. And thinking of it that way makes it a lot easier to just jump in and add value where we can. Because a lot of times when I talk to people about collaboration, like, well, I wasn't invited. I used to think that too. I wasn't invited, they don't want me there. I'm unwanted. But if we just jump in and go where we know we can help in a humble way, not trying to micromanage, who knows what you'll be able to get to working together as a team. This can be tricky, though. There's one person I know who's exceptionally talented at doing this, magically finds their way onto teams they weren't on, seems to be able to pull other people into project teams, people that maybe in the beginning we didn't know we'd really need, but boy, were we thankful to have them afterwards. That's Chris Korak. He and I used to work together at an agency as a director of search, and I asked him, Chris, how do you do it? And his answer was super simple, two-part. One, he said, really, Rebekah? It's all tone. How you approach someone and say, hey, I think I could help in that way, or hey, I think we better bring in someone else. There's a cool way to say that, and there's a not cool way to say that. And then he said, I find that my kind of bid to add more people in and have a collaborative process is much better received when I have a little data or information, facts to back that up. And when he was telling me about an example, I realized what he was doing was he was building a business case. He told me about a time that we were working on adding and improving a section of Aetna's Medicaid website. And it was just intended to be kind of superficial design improvement. And he realized, because he was talking to some people, he wasn't even on this project, he realized that they were getting stuck and they felt like, I don't know if this is the right answer, this superficial design. I don't know if this is actually going to fix the problem. And so he did a little digging around. He found that 40 to 50% of people who are searching for Medicaid are also searching for how to enroll in Medicaid programs. And Aetna had no intention of talking about that on their website at all. So just like Misty. I was like, I know her name. Just like Misty was saying earlier, if you can't be found for something if you're not talking about it. And so he brought this to the people who could make decisions around who would be on the team. And he went through the list of who needed to be involved, a UX person, a designer, a content strategist, a writer. We probably need the developer to make some changes in the CMS. And he was able to get that pushed forward because he tied it to that organization's goals and needs. We can do the same thing when we're presenting a case and making a case for collaboration. That's what being active looks like. And so the result of this, Aetna was so happy with the results and with the increased traffic that they received, they actually extended this change to several other websites for several other states. All right, so building a business case, it is essential to practicing active openness because it builds trust and uncovers massive hidden potential. But the trick to doing this right, and this is something that came up when I was talking to Nicole as well, in our conversation, she was telling me about how she approaches web writing. And she said, as a web writer, it's kind of like this systematic thing. A user is thinking, okay, I'm doing this step, what might I do next? And she said, well, I have to think of my writing sort of like a programmer would, almost like code. And I realized when she was saying that she has this kind of, knowledge of how developers and programmers do their work. This is what I call material literacy. It's also called being T-shaped. It means that even though we have a very deep expertise in our area, that we build a broad knowledge in complementary disciplines or overlapping roles that helps us make smart decisions and know how to work together with other people. Think about Chris. He wouldn't have been able to build that business case if he didn't have broad knowledge of who might be involved to implement the changes that he was proposing, right? 3 easy ways to practice this. 1, just start asking teammates who work in different departments or in different roles about their work. Maybe take a developer out to coffee and ask them to explain to you how something on the back end is working that you don't quite understand. See how that works. It might really open up a lot of opportunities and give you some really great insights. Secondly, if you are seeing something in your organization that you know could benefit from collaboration, don't wait to be invited. Don't expect for people to automatically think that it's the best idea in the world. Build a business case. Support your idea with facts and metrics if possible. Know who would have to be involved and how, and tie everything back to those business goals and those user needs. And then finally, diversify your education. I'm a content strategist. At heart, that's what I do. That's my main area of work, and I love reading what other content strategists write in the community. But it's really helpful to read things that project managers and designers are writing about too, and it's really helpful to follow people who do different things on Twitter to see what are they talking about, what challenges are they facing. Moving on to outward openness. Outward openness is an exercise in empathy. It's when we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we're working with and designing for to create solutions that are right for them. So we know that the best solutions often lie in the intersection, right? Or they do lie at the intersection of business goals and user needs. But what do we mean by user needs or customer needs? We mean gaining empathy. Funny thing about empathy, there was a recent study or research done by Google called Project Aristotle. It was over 5 years of research, and they studied what makes high-performing teams high-performing in contrast to low-performing teams. They studied hundreds of employees, and all of these teams, whether high or low-performing, had the brightest and best people on them. What was the main difference? It was something that good managers have known for years: empathy. The high-performing teams had people who could take the perspective of others, who had empathy for their teammates. So clearly, a part of practicing this type of openness is gaining empathy both for our teammates and our customers. One way to do that is by doing an empathy map. An empathy map is simply thinking through what might someone be thinking, feeling, and doing, right? Not just when they're using this product or service at this point in time, but also in their day-to-day so that our product and service can better fit into that experience. I discovered this on Sherry's Berries. I was working on a project they wanted to increase loyalty for, and they had determined that the best solution to increasing loyalty was going to be eliciting an over-the-top thank you from the gift recipient, and they had even invested in software to get that sort of response. Well, when my team came in, we talked to real customers, found out that how satisfied they felt with their purchase decision had nothing to do with getting a thank you. It had everything to do with, is that product going to spoil or not? Is someone going to be there when those berries are delivered? These are chocolate dipped berries. And then, in discovering those insights, we were able to define the problem statement with the customers. So together, we determined that they needed more visibility into the shipping process. They needed to have a way to understand how the berries were being protected and packaged, and they needed to see if there was a way for that gift recipient to be able to reschedule the gift if they weren't going to be home. And they would know that they were going to be successful when people were more willing to refer other people to Sherry's Berries, and of course when they saw those recurring orders increase. But all of that care that we put into understanding what customers needs, we have to do the same thing when it comes to our internal users. This is Aura Seltzer. She works at Happy Cog, and she was involved in the Harvard College website redesign. She was talking to me about that design process, and she said that at first she wanted to really hold on tight to that entire experience, and she had a design system that she thought would work. But she realized that the ultimate test of that design system would be whether or not the content would actually work, or would it break that design system? Whether or not the editors and the people who are responsible for maintaining that digital experience long after her job was through would be able to do that. And so she adjusted her approach, and she involved them in that decision-making process. And so I propose that the right solutions don't just lie at the intersection of meeting business goals and user needs, but also our internal needs too. So as much empathy as we have for our customers, let's have them for our teammates. 3 easy ways to practice this. Try empathy mapping. It's really easy. You can do it in 5 minutes. You can do it with yourself, or even cooler, you can do it with some of your teammates who are also working on that project with you, or even real customers like Sherry's Berries. When you're looking at the work that you're doing, try to take on the perspective of with, not for. I'm creating this with someone instead of I'm creating this for someone. See how that changes the decisions that you might make. And then finally, take your best idea off the table. Just like Aura had to kind of take her ideas off the table. One of my favorite tricks to challenge myself is if I think I know the answer, I'll write it up on the wall, and then I'll say, what would I do if I couldn't do that? This is a great activity to try with a team. Have everyone in the room do that. Last one, exponential openness. Exponential openness happens when cross-discipline teams come together to co-design something greater than any one of them could on their own. This is when we start to see the benefits of collaboration rapidly increasing. I remember when I first saw the Virgin America website, I was so blown away. I thought, this is the biggest improvement I've seen to an airline website in forever, and I wondered how they do it, how they pulled this off, because typically airlines are sort of archaic and there's a lot of decision makers involved. So I called up Joe Stewart. He works for Work & Co., and he was one of the lead designers on this. And he told me they had a couple really cool things happening. One, they worked as like pair designers. So there was 2 lead designers, and they worked in tandem, and they shared the decision-making process, often sketching alongside each other. And you could do this with development too, right? You can have pair development where two developers are working alongside each other, often even sharing the same monitor, where one person is writing code and the other person is sort of either validating that or helping them to overcome a hurdle where they're stuck. This might sound like, oh my gosh, wouldn't that increase the time that it would take to do something twofold? Actually, no, because think about how much time gets lost when we spin our wheels trying to solve a solution that would be so much easier to solve. Two heads are better than one. The other thing that they did is they made sure that everyone was invited. He said all the different people who knew what it was going to take to make this successful. So this meant people in IT, people who understood Sabre, the kind of weird, archaic engine booking system that lets them know when flights are available. And this was a little dramatic and drastic, but they moved into Virgin America's office for a year while they were going through this. Now, most of us work in our own organization, so we don't have to worry about getting permission to go do something like that. But we can make sure that we're inviting the right teammates to our working sessions too, everyone who knows what it's going to take to make that successful. Designers, developers, our executive management, our project managers. But most importantly, I know that, I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of times I'll work on something and not think that an executive would like to be involved. And we just kind of, show them later. Maybe we're only talking to someone, a manager, and they just don't want to burden the executives. And then I find out that we have to change everything, right? So getting executives involved very early on can be super beneficial. This is the VP of Virgin America. He says, part of where we are actually able to undertake such a big process successfully is that we didn't have a wall that we tossed things over. They had really tight feedback loops, and it was very collaborative. He was engaged and on board with this process too. This is very rare. But I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that it is possible, right? So in those meetings they would always make sure that they weren't just talking and listening, they could see and do as well. So Kevin is going to talk next about some things you can do to make meetings better. These are some of the things that Virgin America was doing. They made sure they used Post-its and they were sketching. They didn't just sit and talk about ideas. They made sure there was visual representation so people could be specific and make actionable choices, not just talking about the work, doing the work together. And this can work with remote teams. Point to View is one of my favorite overhead cams for sketching with people who aren't there with you. And Mural is a great online collaboration tool that allows you to do Post-it-like stuff with people who work in different locations all around the world. So 3 ways to encourage exponential openness. Notice I said encourage instead of practice. This isn't something you can own. This is only something that you can help support. But get your executive involved sooner than later. Build that business case first, right? And try to involve them in a way that makes sense for their schedule and their responsibilities. Team up with someone, even if they're in the same discipline. 2 heads are better than 1. It's much better to talk to someone else who might be able to work on something with you and get over that problem sooner than sitting, suffering alone in silence. And then design your meetings differently. Make sure that you are visually representing the information that you're discussing. Find ways to do the work, not just talk about the work. And so, just to wrap things up, collaboration and co-design are essential to building the interconnected experiences of the future, right? But they're not going to happen. That kind of collaboration is not going to happen without a culture of openness. That's what sets the stage for successful collaboration. And there are ways that you can champion this, right? You can practice personal openness, be humble, ask a lot of questions, just jump in, don't wait to be invited, start with heart, practice empathy, and join forces with your coworkers, with your clients or stakeholders, right? And the rest of your team. So this is going to be hard work, but it's going to be worth it. So let's make it happen. Thank you so much. My name is Rebekah. I'm the co-founder of Togetherly and the principal at Onward. Thanks very much.